The gunshot split the night like thunder. Elias McGraw stood before his gate, rain hammering his shoulders, rifle trembling in his weathered hands. 5 riders circled him, torches blazing, horses snorting white breath into the darkness. Theodore Clark sat tallest among them, revolver aimed steady at Elias's chest. "Give her back. McGraw. That woman belongs to my family." Behind Elias, Hannah Clark pressed against the porch post, one hand cradling her swollen belly, the other covering her mouth to stifle her sobs. 3 months pregnant. 3 months of fragile peace about to shatter. Elias shook his head slowly. She doesn't belong to anyone but herself. Theodore's finger tightened on the trigger. Wrong answer. The shot rang out. Blood, screaming, darkness. 3 months earlier. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Arizona sun beat down on Elias McGraw's small ranch like a hammer on an anvil. 200 acres of stubborn earth, a handful of horses, and a vegetable garden that refused to thrive. This was his kingdom of solitude. He had built it carefully over 10 years, far enough from town that neighbors were a distant concept, close enough that supplies were within a hard day's ride. Elias was 45, but looked older. The desert had carved lines into his face like water cuts through stone. His hands were calloused, his back perpetually bent from years of hard labor, and his eyes carried the weight of things he would never speak aloud. He rose before dawn each morning, fed the horses, mended fences, and cooked simple meals over a wood stove. At night, he sat on his porch and stared at the 2 small graves on the hillside behind his house. He never went to them, never brought flowers, just looked. The townspeople knew him as McGraw Quiet, competent, and utterly uninterested in conversation. They didn't know that wasn't his real name. They didn't know about the warrant that had hung over his head for a decade, or the ghosts that followed him everywhere he went. On this particular morning, Elias stood in his dusty yard, watching a hawk circle overhead. The bird reminded him of freedom, something he had forgotten the taste of. He turned back toward the house, his boots crunching on the dry earth, when he noticed something unusual on the horizon. A rider approached from town, not uncommon, but the way the horse moved slow, labored suggested trouble. Elias squinted. Not a rider, a riderless horse, dragging something. No, someone. He mounted his own horse quickly and rode out to meet them. As he drew closer, his stomach tightened. A young woman stumbled alongside the animal, one hand gripping the saddle, barely keeping herself upright. Her black dress was torn at the shoulder, her hair wild and matted with dust. Her face was streaked with dried tears and dirt. She looked up at him with hollow eyes and collapsed. Elias dismounted fast, catching her before she hit the ground. She was light, too light. He could feel her ribs through the thin fabric of her dress. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Can you hear me?" She didn't respond. Her eyes fluttered, unfocused. He lifted her carefully onto his horse and led them both back to his ranch. As they moved, something glinted in the dirt where she had fallen. Elias stopped and bent down. A wedding ring. He picked it up, feeling its weight in his palm, then slipped it into his pocket. Whatever story this woman carried, it was heavy. And now, whether he wanted to or not, Elias McGraw was part of it. Elias carried the woman into his house and laid her on the narrow bed in the small room that had once belonged to his son. The room was sparse, just a bed frame, a thin mattress, and a wooden chair by the window. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light. He fetched water from the well and brought it to her lips. She drank desperately, coughing, then drank again. Her eyes remained closed, but her breathing steadied. For 3 days, she barely spoke. Elias left food by her bedside: bread, beans, whatever he could manage. Sometimes he found the plate empty, sometimes untouched. He didn't press her. He understood that some silences needed to be respected. On the 4th morning, he found her sitting on the porch steps, staring at the horizon. Her hair was still tangled, but she had washed her face. The bruises on her arms were visible now, dark purple handprints that made Elias's jaw tighten. He sat down a few feet away, not speaking. After a long silence, she said, "My name is Hannah Clark." Her voice was soft, broken. Elias nodded but didn't respond. "My husband died a month ago," she continued, her hands twisting in her lap. "Thomas Clark. He was a lieutenant. They said he died honorably. But I don't know if that's true anymore." Elias waited. "His father, Theodore Clark, he runs things in town. Big ranch. Lots of men working for him. Respected." She spat the word like poison. "After the funeral, he told me I wasn't welcome anymore. Said Thomas died because of me. Said I brought shame to their family." Her voice cracked, and she pressed her palms against her eyes. "They burned my clothes in the yard. His brothers Marcus and James, they watched. Everyone watched. The preacher, the neighbors. Nobody said anything. Nobody helped." Elias's hands curled into fists on his knees. "Theodore gave me one day to leave town. I had nowhere to go, no family, no money. So I walked." She looked at him then, her eyes red-rimmed. "I walked until I couldn't anymore." Elias stood slowly and went inside. He returned with a wedding ring and placed it in her palm. "You drop this." Hannah stared at the ring, then closed her fist around it. A tear slipped down her cheek. "I don't want it," she whispered. "But I don't know how to let it go." Elias sat back down. "You don't have to decide today." That night, Elias sat by the window with his rifle across his lap. He hadn't told Hannah, but he had seen them shadows on horseback in the distance, watching. The Clark family wasn't finished with her. And now, by sheltering her, Elias had made himself their enemy too. He thought about the graves on the hill, about Sarah and Daniel, about the choices that had brought him to this isolated place. Sometimes running wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to stand. Hannah spoke the truth slowly, like pulling thorns from a wound. It took her 5 days to tell Elias everything, and each revelation cut deeper than the last. Thomas Clark had been a troubled man. Hannah learned this too late after the wedding, after the promises. He drank heavily and gambled worse. He owed money to dangerous people, money he couldn't repay on a lieutenant's salary. The official report said he died in a skirmish with Apache raiders. But Hannah had overheard whispers at the funeral, an accidental discharge, a bullet to the temple, self-inflicted. The army had covered it up to preserve his honor. Theodore Clark had ensured it. They needed someone to blame, Hannah said one evening as she helped Elias prepare supper. Her hands shook as she peeled potatoes. Theodore said if Thomas had a stronger wife, a godly wife, he wouldn't have fallen into sin. He said I failed his son. Elias stirred the pot of beans on the stove, his face unreadable. At the funeral, Theodore pulled me aside, told me I had brought a curse on their family, said I was never worthy of the Clark name. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Then he told me what would happen if I didn't leave. She set down the knife, staring at her hands. He said accidents happen to women like me, that I could disappear, and nobody would ask questions. Elias turned to face her. Did he threaten you directly? Hannah nodded. He said the desert is full of graves nobody ever finds. The room fell silent, except for the crackling of the fire. Elias ladled beans into 2 bowls and placed one in front of Hannah. She stared at it, but didn't eat. There's something else, she said finally. Something I haven't told you. Elias sat across from her and waited. Hannah's hands moved to her stomach. A gesture so subtle, Elias almost missed it. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air like smoke. Elias's expression didn't change, but his knuckles whitened around his spoon. How long? 3 months? Maybe a little more. Her voice was hollow. Thomas had been gone for 8 months before he died. Stationed at Fort Grant. It's not his child. Elias set down his spoon carefully. Then whose? Hannah's face crumpled, and she covered it with her hands. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. When she finally did, the words came out strangled and broken. After the funeral, Theodore made me stay behind at the church. He said we needed to pray for Thomas's soul. Everyone else left. The preacher left. She was shaking now, her whole body trembling. He locked the door. Elias's jaw clenched so tight he thought his teeth might crack. He said I owed the family a debt, that I had destroyed his son, and I needed to make amends. Tears streamed down her face. I tried to fight him. I did. But he's so much stronger, and there was nowhere to run. She looked up at Elias with devastated eyes. 3 weeks later, I knew I was pregnant. When Theodore found out, he didn't deny it. He just smiled and said nobody would believe me if I told. Then he had his sons throw me out. Elias stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the window, fists clenched at his sides, staring out into the darkness. Every muscle in his body was coiled tight, fury radiating from him like heat. I understand if you want me to leave, Hannah said quietly behind him. I'm carrying a monster's child. I'm ruined. Elias turned slowly. His voice, when he spoke, was low and hard as iron. You're not ruined. You're a survivor. And that child is innocent. Hannah stared at him, disbelief and hope warring on her face. Nobody's taking you anywhere, Elias said. Not Theodore Clark. Not anyone. For the first time since arriving, Hannah allowed herself to cry not from despair, but from relief. The weeks that followed brought an unexpected rhythm to the ranch. Hannah grew stronger, her bruises fading to yellow and then disappearing entirely. She began to help around the house, sweeping, mending, cooking meals that were more elaborate than Elias's usual fare. He didn't ask her to. She simply did it, perhaps needing the motion to keep darker thoughts at bay. Elias taught her to ride. Hannah had never been on a horse before marriage, and Thomas had never bothered to teach her on her first attempt. She gripped the saddle horn with white knuckles, terrified the animal would bolt. Elias walked beside her, one hand on the reins, speaking in low, calming tones to the horse or to her. Hannah wasn't sure. By the second week, she could manage a slow walk around the property. By the third, She was cantering across the open ground, her face split with a cautious smile. "You're a natural," Elias said one afternoon, watching her bring the horse to a smooth stop. Hannah dismounted, breathless and laughing. It was the first time Elias had heard her laugh. The sound was fragile, like glass, but real. He also taught her to shoot. She protested at first, insisting she could never harm anyone. Elias set up tin cans on the fence and placed the rifle in her hands anyway. "You don't learn to shoot because you want to hurt someone," he said, standing behind her, adjusting her grip. "You learn because you need to protect yourself when nobody else will." Hannah's first shot went wide. The second clipped the fence post. By the 10th, she knocked over a can. Her hands shook, but she kept trying. During the evenings, they sat on the porch together. Elias would whittle or clean his rifle while Hannah sewed or simply watched the sun set over the distant hills. Their conversations were sparse but comfortable. Elias was not a man of many words, and Hannah seemed content with silence. One night, she began to hum. It was a melody Elias didn't recognize, soft and mournful. When she noticed him listening, she stopped. "My mother used to sing that," she said quietly, "before she died." "Keep going," Elias said. So she did, her voice tentative at first, then growing steadier. The song spoke of rivers and homecomings, of journeys that end in rest. Elias closed his eyes and listened, and for a brief moment, the weight he carried felt lighter. But peace was always temporary. One morning, Elias rode out to check the fence line and found fresh tracks, 3 horses, maybe 4. They circled the property at a distance, never coming close but never leaving entirely. Someone was watching. He didn't tell Hannah immediately. He didn't want to frighten her, but that night, he loaded extra ammunition and kept his rifle closer than usual. A week later, Hannah found a dead rabbit on the porch. Its throat had been cut cleanly, and it was still warm. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. Elias examined it without touching. "Go inside." "What is it?" "A message." Hannah's face went pale. "They know I'm here. They've known for a while." Elias stood, scanning the horizon. "They're trying to scare you. It's working." That night, Elias didn't sleep. He sat by the window with his rifle across his lap, watching the darkness for movement. Around midnight, he saw a figure on the ridgeline, just a silhouette against the stars. It stood there for a long moment, unmoving, then disappeared. The next morning, there was something else on the porch. Not a dead animal this time, but a bundle wrapped in leather. Elias unwrapped it carefully. Inside was fresh venison, expertly butchered, and a single eagle feather. Hannah stared at it in confusion. "What does it mean?" Elias held the feather up to the light, a faint smile touching his lips. "It means we have a friend." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a figure appeared at the edge of the property. An old man, his long hair streaked with gray, walked slowly toward the house. He wore no weapons that Elias could see, but he carried himself like a man who didn't need them. Hannah moved behind Elias instinctively. The old man stopped 20 feet away and raised one hand in greeting. He spoke in halting English, his voice deep and weathered. "I am Red Hawk. I bring no harm." Elias stepped forward and nodded. "I know who you are." Red Hawk's eyes moved to Hannah, then back to Elias. "She is safe here. She is..." The old man nodded slowly. "Good. The men who watch, they are not good men." "I know." Red Hawk turned to leave, then paused. Your wife. She had my blood. Elias's throat tightened. Sarah. Yes. She was brave. Red Hawk's voice softened. Like this one. Then he walked back into the growing darkness, disappearing as silently as he had come. Hannah looked at Elias, questions in her eyes. But he didn't explain. Some truths were too painful to speak aloud. That night, for the first time in 10 years, Elias slept soundly. They were not alone anymore. They came in the afternoon when the sun hung heavy and merciless overhead. 5 riders emerged from the heat shimmer like phantoms, materializing from the desert itself. Elias saw them first. He had been watching for days, knowing this moment was inevitable. Hannah, he called quietly, get inside. She was hanging laundry and turned to see the riders approaching. Her face went white. It's them. I know. Go inside and stay away from the windows. Elias, now. She gathered her skirts and ran for the house. Elias walked to the gate, rifle in hand, and waited. Theodore Clark rode at the front, flanked by his sons, Marcus and James. 2 ranch hands accompanied them, both armed. They stopped 30 feet from the gate, their horses snorting and stamping in the dust. Theodore was a large man, barrel-chested and thick-necked, with a face that might have been handsome once, but had hardened into something cruel. He sat his horse like a man accustomed to being obeyed. McGraw, Theodore said, his voice carrying easily across the distance. We've come for what belongs to us. Elias said nothing. That woman in your house, she's family property. You got no right keeping her. She's not property, Elias replied evenly. And she's not going anywhere. Marcus, the older son, laughed a harsh, ugly sound. You hear that? Pa? He thinks he's got a say in this. Theodore leaned forward in his saddle. I'll make this simple. McGraw, hand her over, and we'll forget you interfered. Keep her, and you'll regret it. She stays. Theodore's face darkened. You don't know who you're dealing with, old man. I own half this county. The sheriff? The judge, they're in my pocket. You're nobody, a squatter on a worthless piece of dirt. Maybe so, Elias said. But this worthless piece of dirt is mine, and she's under my protection. James, the younger son, spat on the ground. Protection from what you're one man with a rusty rifle. Elias's grip tightened on the weapon, but his voice remained calm. That's all it takes. Theodore studied him for a long moment, then smiled a cold, calculating expression. You got spine, I'll give you that. But spine won't stop a bullet. Last chance from McGraw. Give her up, or we'll take her. Elias raised the rifle slightly, not aiming but making his intent clear. You're welcome to try. The 2 groups faced each other in tense silence. The ranch hands shifted nervously in their saddles. Marcus's hand drifted toward his holster. Then, from the ridge behind the ranch, a voice called out. Not words exactly, a sound, sharp and carrying. A whistle that echoed across the valley. All eyes turned upward. On the rocky outcropping stood Red Hawk, tall and unmoving. Beside him were 4 other Apache warriors, their rifles visible even from this distance. They made no threatening gestures, but their presence spoke volumes. Theodore's face flushed red. What the hell? Like I said, Elias replied quietly. She's under protection. Marcus looked at his father. Pa, we can't. Shut up. Theodore's jaw worked furiously as he stared at the ridge, then back at Elias. His horse shifted beneath him, sensing his anger. You think you've won? You think those savages scare me? I think you should leave. Theodore pointed a thick finger at Elias. This isn't over, McGraw. Not by a long shot. You just made a powerful enemy. Wouldn't be the first time. For a moment, it seemed Theodore might charge forward anyway. Consequences be damned. But then he jerked his reins hard, wheeling his horse around. Let's go. Marcus and James followed, but James glanced back once, his expression unreadable. The ranch hands looked relieved to be leaving. As the riders disappeared into the distance, Elias exhaled slowly and lowered his rifle. His hands were shaking not from fear, but from the adrenaline coursing through him. Hannah emerged from the house, her arms wrapped around herself. Are they gone? For now? She looked up at the ridge where Red Hawk and his men still stood. Why did they help us? Because that's what good people do. Red Hawk raised one hand in acknowledgement. Then he and the others vanished back into the rocks as silently as they had appeared. That evening, Hannah sat on the porch steps while Elias checked the perimeter. When he returned, she was crying quietly. What's wrong? You stood up for me, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Nobody's ever done that before. Not my father. Not Thomas. Nobody. Elias sat down beside her, careful to leave space between them. You deserved better than what they gave you. I'm carrying his child, Theodore's child. Doesn't that disgust you? No. Why not? Elias looked out at the darkening sky. Because you didn't choose it. And that child didn't choose it either. Neither of you deserves to suffer for his sins. Hannah turned to him, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me as human. Elias nodded but said nothing more. Words felt inadequate for the moment. As night fell and they went inside, neither of them noticed the single rider watching from a distant hill, James Clark, sitting motionless on his horse. His face troubled as he stared at the small ranch below. 3 days of uneasy peace passed before Hannah found the letter. She had been sorting through her small cloth bag, looking for a needle and thread, when her fingers brushed against something stiff sewn into the lining. She carefully unpicked the stitches and pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed and creased on the front. In Thomas's handwriting, to Hannah open only if I'm gone. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. The letter was short, written in a hurried scrawl that suggested fear or desperation. Hannah, if you're reading this, I'm dead. I'm sorry for everything I've put you through. I was a coward and a fool. I owed money to dangerous men, and I couldn't face what I'd become. But there's something worse you need to know. My father is not the man people think he is. He's done terrible things, things I can't write here. If I die, he'll come for you. He'll blame you for my failures because that's what he does. Run, Hannah. Run as far as you can and never look back. Don't trust anyone in my family. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry for everything. Thomas. Hannah read it 3 times, each word cutting deeper. Thomas had known. He had known what his father was and had left her anyway, offering only this inadequate warning. She found Elias repairing a saddle in the barn and handed him the letter without a word. He read it slowly, his expression darkening with each line. He knew, Hannah said, her voice hollow. He knew his father would hurt me, and he still left me there. Elias folded the letter carefully. Fear makes people do terrible things. Doesn't excuse it, but explains it. I wanted to believe Thomas was good, that somewhere inside, he cared about me. She laughed bitterly. I was so stupid. You weren't stupid. You were hopeful. There's a difference. Hannah wrapped her arms around herself, her shoulders shaking. I don't even know why I'm crying. I didn't love him. I don't think he loved me either. We were just two people trapped in something neither of us wanted. Elias set the letter aside and looked at her directly. There's something I need to tell you about why Theodore hates me so much. Hannah wiped her eyes. What do you mean? Elias was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as if fighting with himself. Finally, he spoke. My real name isn't McGraw. It's Morgan. Elias Morgan. And 10 years ago, I killed Theodore's brother. Hannah went very still. His name was William Clark. He was a captain in the cavalry, stationed near Fort Carson in Colorado. I had a wife, Sarah, and a son, Daniel. He was 5 years old. Elias's voice remained steady, but his hands clenched into fists. One night, I was out hunting. When I came back, William Clark was in my home. He paused, the memory clearly painful. Hannah didn't interrupt. He'd been drinking. He forced himself on Sarah while Daniel hid in the corner, crying. When I walked in, William tried to shoot me. We fought. I got his gun and I killed him. One shot. Center mass. Hannah's hand went to her mouth. The army came for me. Said I murdered an officer. They didn't care what he'd done to my wife. She was just a half-breed Apache woman to them. Not worth justice. His voice turned hard. So we ran. Sarah, Daniel, and me. We ran for weeks, trying to get somewhere safe. But they got sick. Cholera. I watched them die in a dirty room in some nameless town. And there was nothing I could do. Tears ran silently down Hannah's face. I buried them on a hillside and kept running. Changed my name. Came here. And I've been hiding ever since. Elias looked up at her. William Clark was Theodore's older brother. I didn't know that until I saw Theodore's face when he came here. He has the same eyes. So when you protected me, I was protecting myself too, Elias admitted. Because if Theodore finds out who I really am, he won't just take you. He'll see me hanged for killing his brother. Hannah sat down heavily on a hay bale, processing everything. We're both trapped. Yes. What do we do? Before Elias could answer, they heard horses, many of them, approaching fast. They rushed outside to see not 5 riders this time, but more than a dozen. Theodore sat at the front, and beside him rode Sheriff Miller, a portly man with a badge pinned to his vest. Theodore's smile was triumphant. Elias Morgan, you're under arrest for the murder of Captain William Clark. Elias's blood ran cold. Somehow, Theodore had discovered the truth. Sheriff Miller dismounted and approached with iron shackles. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Hannah ran forward. No, he was defending his wife. It was self-defense. Theodore laughed. Self-defense? He shot an unarmed officer in cold blood. There were witnesses. It was a lie. But who would challenge him? The sheriff clamped the shackles onto Elias's wrists. Hannah grabbed at the man's arm, pleading. Please, you don't understand. Marcus Clark dismounted and shoved Hannah backward. She stumbled and fell, crying out as she hit the ground. She clutched her stomach, gasping. Elias lunged forward. Don't touch her. 2 ranch hands restrained him, while Theodore dismounted and walked slowly toward Hannah, who was struggling to stand. "You've caused me a lot of trouble, girl," Theodore said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. "But don't worry. Once McGraw or Morgan, or whatever his name is hanged, you're coming home, where you belong. And this time, you won't leave." Hannah's face went white with terror. Theodore leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "That baby you're carrying, my grandchild. One way or another, you'll raise it under my roof, and you'll remember every day who really owns you." "No," Hannah breathed. "Oh, yes." Theodore straightened and addressed the sheriff loudly. "Take the prisoner to town. We'll see justice done." As they dragged Elias toward a horse, he looked back at Hannah. Their eyes met. And in that moment, she saw his fear not for himself, but for her. "I'm sorry," he mouthed. Then they took him away, leaving Hannah alone on the ground, watching the dust cloud fade into nothing. Hannah knelt in the dust long after the riders disappeared. The sun beat down mercilessly, but she barely noticed. Her mind raced through possibilities, each more hopeless than the last. Elias was gone. Theodore had won. She would be dragged back to that house, imprisoned, forced to raise her child under the roof of the man who had violated her. She pressed her hands against her stomach, feeling the slight swell there. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the unborn child. "I'm so sorry." A sound made her look up. Red Hawk stood at the edge of the property, watching her with ancient, knowing eyes. He approached slowly and extended his hand. Hannah took it, and he pulled her to her feet with surprising strength for his age. "They take him," Red Hawk said. It wasn't a question. Hannah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "They're going to hang him. And then Theodore will—" Her voice broke. Red Hawk was silent for a moment, then spoke carefully in his halting English. "Theodore Clark, bad man. Brother also bad. Many years ago, William Clark killed my wife. Shoot her because she would not—" He struggled for the word, then made a gesture that Hannah understood all too well. Her stomach turned. He tried to force himself on her. Red Hawk nodded. "She fight. He kill her. Then he shoot me." The old man pulled aside his shirt, revealing a massive scar across his ribs. "I live, but soldiers say I attack him. No justice." "Just like Sarah," Hannah breathed. "Elias's wife." "Sarah was my daughter," Red Hawk said quietly. "Half Apache, half white. Her mother, my second wife, died when Sarah young. I give her to mission school, hope for better life. She meet Elias, good man. He love her true." Hannah's eyes widened. "You're Sarah's father. Does Elias know?" "He know. After William Clark hurt my daughter, Elias kill him. This is right. This is justice our law and your law both say is right. But powerful men make their own law." Red Hawk's jaw tightened. "I follow Elias for 10 years, protect him from far away. He is my son now, same as if Sarah still live." A commotion in the distance drew their attention. More riders were approaching, but not from town. These came from the direction of the settlement, and they weren't Theodore's men. At the front rode James Clark, Theodore's younger son. Behind him was a woman Hannah had never seen before, perhaps 30 years old, wearing a simple dress and bonnet. Following them were more than 20 townspeople, shopkeepers, farmers, the blacksmith, even Pastor Reynolds from the church. Hannah stepped back instinctively, but Red Hawk placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Wait," James dismounted quickly and approached, his face flushed and determined. He was younger than Marcus, perhaps 25, with softer features that hadn't yet hardened into his father's cruelty. "Miss Clark, Hannah, please listen. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I need you to come to town. Right now." "Why would I go anywhere with you?" Hannah's voice shook. "Because I'm going to tell the truth," James said. "About my father, about everything." The woman who had ridden with him stepped forward. She was thin, with prematurely gray hair and haunted eyes. "My name is Grace Winters. 5 years ago, I worked as a maid in the Clark household." Her voice was steady but quiet. "Theodore Clark raped me in the back pantry one afternoon when his wife was visiting her sister. When I discovered I was pregnant, he paid me $300 to leave town and never speak of it." Hannah's breath caught. "I took the money because I was terrified and had no one to help me." Grace continued, "I lost the baby 3 months later. I've lived with that shame ever since. But when James found me and told me what happened to you, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore." James looked at Hannah with desperate sincerity. "I've known what my father is for years. I've watched him destroy people and hide behind his money and influence. I've been too much of a coward to stop him. But after seeing him take Elias, after hearing what he said to you, I can't do it anymore. I won't." Pastor Reynolds stepped forward. "Hannah, several of us have witnessed Theodore's cruelty over the years. We've been too afraid to speak against him. But if you'll testify, if Grace will testify, we'll stand with you, all of us." Martha Henderson, who owned the general store, nodded firmly. "That man has terrorized this town long enough. My daughter." Her voice cracked. "My daughter Emily was 14 when Theodore cornered her behind the store. She was too frightened to tell anyone for months. We sent her to live with her aunt in California to escape him." Other voices joined in, each adding their own story of Theodore's abuse, intimidation, and corruption. Hannah listened in growing amazement. She had thought herself alone, but the poison of Theodore Clark had touched dozens of lives. "The circuit judge arrives in town tonight," James said. "He's not in my father's pocket. He's from the territorial capital. If we can present evidence before my father knows what's happening, we might have a chance, but we need you." Hannah looked at Red Hawk, who nodded once. "Speak truth. Strong medicine." She turned back to James. "Your father will destroy you for this." "I know," James said. "But I can't be his son anymore." Hannah straightened her shoulders and wiped her tears. "Then let's go." The ride to town felt both endless and too short. Hannah's heart pounded as they approached the main street. People stopped and stared as the unusual procession passed James Clark, leading a group of townspeople and the Apache elder riding openly through town. The sheriff's office sat across from the courthouse. Through the window, Hannah could see Elias sitting in a cell, his head in his hands. Her chest tightened. Judge Harlan Whitmore was a severe-looking man in his 60s with iron-gray hair and piercing blue eyes. He had set up in the courthouse and was reviewing papers when James burst in with the group. "Your Honor, I need to present new evidence in the case of Elias Morgan." The judge looked up, annoyed. "The trial isn't until tomorrow morning." "This can't wait," James insisted. For the next hour, testimony poured forth. Grace spoke about Theodore's assault and subsequent payment. Hannah, her voice shaking but clear, recounted the rape in the church and Theodore's threats. Martha Henderson told of her daughter's trauma. 3 other women came forward with similar stories. Pastor Reynolds admitted he had known Theodore was evil, but had been too frightened to confront a man who donated heavily to the church. I failed in my duty to God and to these women. I can't fail again. Red Hawk, speaking through James as translator, described William Clark's murder of his wife and assault on Sarah Morgan. Elias Morgan defend his family. This is law, your law too. Man who hurt woman and child. He deserved death. Judge Whitmore listened to everything in grim silence, taking careful notes. When the testimony ended, he sat back in his chair and removed his spectacles, cleaning them slowly while he thought. These are serious allegations, he said finally. But I need more than testimony. I need proof. James reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather-bound ledger. This is my father's private account book. I took it from his study. It documents payments to Sheriff Miller, to witnesses in previous cases, to women he wanted silenced. Everything. The judge took the ledger and began reading. His expression grew darker with each page. Finally, he looked up. Where is Theodore Clark now? At his ranch, I assume. James said. He thinks he's won. Judge Whitmore stood. Sheriff Miller, the portly sheriff, appeared in the doorway, looking nervous. Yes, Your Honor. You're under arrest for corruption and obstruction of justice. Bailiff, take him into custody. Miller's face went white. You can't. Theodore Clark will. Theodore Clark will be joining you shortly. The judge said coldly. He turned to his bailiff. Gather a marshal's posse. We're riding to the Clark ranch immediately. He looked at James. You've done a brave thing, son. Testifying against your own father. He's not my father anymore, James said quietly. Not after this. Judge Whitmore nodded, then addressed the room. As for Elias Morgan, based on this testimony and evidence, I'm issuing an immediate stay of execution pending a full review of his case. The killing of William Clark appears to have been justifiable defense of family. He looked at Red Hawk. I wish someone had listened to you 10 years ago. Red Hawk simply nodded. As the judge prepared to ride out, Hannah approached Elias's cell. He looked up, shocked to see her. Hannah. What, how? We told the truth, she said simply. All of us. Together. Elias stood and came to the bars. His hands reached through, and Hannah took them without hesitation. You saved me, he said, his voice thick with emotion. No, Hannah replied. We saved each other. Theodore Clark was arrested that evening without incident. The judge found him in his study. Surrounded by ledgers he was frantically trying to burn in the fireplace. Marcus, the eldest son, attempted to resist and was subdued by the marshal's men. Both were taken to the territorial prison to await trial. Within 3 months, Theodore was convicted on multiple counts of rape, assault, and corruption. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Marcus received 10 years as an accomplice in various crimes. The Clark Ranch was seized and sold. The proceeds distributed among Theodore's victims as restitution. Sheriff Miller was removed from office and given 5 years for accepting bribes. As for Elias, Judge Whitmore reviewed his case personally and issued a full pardon. The killing of William Clark was an act of justified defense against a violent assault on your family. The judge declared in open court. No reasonable person could expect a man to stand by while his wife was violated. You are free, Mr. Morgan, and the warrant is permanently vacated. For the first time in 10 years, Elias could use his real name without fear. He wept openly in the courtroom, and Red Hawk, sitting in the gallery, allowed himself a small smile. Hannah's pregnancy progressed through the spring. As her belly grew, so did her anxiety about the birth and what would come after. She couldn't shake the image of Theodore's face, couldn't stop hearing his voice claiming ownership of her child. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she voiced her deepest fear. What if I can't love this baby? What if every time I look at her, I see him? Elias was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. When Sarah was pregnant with Daniel, she was terrified. She'd lost 2 babies before him, and she was convinced something would go wrong. But I told her what my mother once told me. Babies don't carry their parents' sins. They come into the world clean, full of possibility. Whatever darkness made them doesn't define them. But what if people in town let them talk? Elias said firmly. This child will grow up knowing she's loved. That's what matters. Hannah wiped her eyes. How do you know it's a girl? Just a feeling. The labor came on a humid night in late summer. Elias rode frantically to fetch the midwife, an Apache woman named Aida whom Red Hawk had recommended. Hannah's screams echoed through the small house, and Elias paced outside, helpless and terrified. It lasted 14 hours. Aida remained calm throughout, speaking in soothing tones and guiding Hannah through each contraction. Finally, as dawn broke over the horizon, a baby's cry pierced the air. Elias rushed inside to find Hannah propped against pillows, exhausted and pale, holding a tiny infant wrapped in a clean blanket. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was wailing with impressive lung capacity. A daughter, Aida announced, smiling. Strong and healthy. Hannah stared at the baby in her arms, her expression unreadable. For a terrible moment, Elias feared she would reject the child. Then Hannah's face crumpled, and she pulled the infant close, sobbing. She's beautiful, Hannah whispered. She's so beautiful. Elias knelt beside the bed, his hand gently touching the baby's tiny fist. The infant's fingers wrapped around his thumb instinctively. What will you name her? Hannah looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. Hope. Her name is Hope. In the weeks that followed, Hannah devoted herself entirely to the baby. Hope was colicky and demanding, crying through the nights and feeding constantly. Hannah walked the floors with her, sang to her, soothed her through every fussy spell. She was exhausted, but her eyes held a fierce protectiveness that hadn't been there before. Elias helped however he could, heating water, preparing meals, taking Hope so Hannah could rest. He found himself enchanted by the tiny creature, her miniature features and the way she gripped his finger with surprising strength. Red Hawk visited frequently, bringing gifts carved from wood, a small rattle, a doll with a leather dress, a bird that dangled from a string. He would sit for hours holding Hope, humming Apache songs while she gazed up at him with dark, curious eyes. She has your mother's spirit, he told Hannah one afternoon. Strong, fighter. One morning, 3 months after Hope's birth, Elias found Hannah in the kitchen garden, planting tomato seeds while Hope napped in a basket nearby. The morning sun caught in Hannah's hair, and she was humming the song her mother had taught her. Elias stood watching for a moment, struck by the transformation. This was not the broken woman he had found collapsed by the roadside. This was someone who had survived, who had fought back and won. He approached slowly, and Hannah looked up with a smile. The soil is good this year. I think we'll have a fine harvest. Hannah, Elias said, his voice uncertain. There's something I want to ask you. She set down her trowel, sensing the seriousness in his tone. What is it? He pulled a simple silver ring from his pocket. Nothing fancy. Just a band he had shaped himself from melted coins. I know this isn't conventional. I know we've been through things most people couldn't imagine. But this place, this life, it feels right with you and Hope here. I'm not good with words, but... He took a breath. Would you marry me? Would you let me be Hope's father, properly? Would you build a family with me? Hannah stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. You've already been her father. From the moment she was born, you've treated her like your own. I want to make it official. I want her to have my name. I want you to have my name. If you'll take it. Hannah stood and took his hands in hers. Elias Morgan, you gave me back my life when I thought I had nothing left to live for. You saw me as human when the world treated me as trash. Yes, 1,000 times. Yes. They were married the following month in a small ceremony at the ranch. Pastor Reynolds, seeking to atone for his previous silence, officiated. James Clark attended, having quietly started a new life working as a clerk in a neighboring town. Grace Winters came, bringing a beautiful quilt she had sewn for Hope. Red Hawk stood as witness, his weathered face creased with approval. The gathering was modest, perhaps 20 people, but it felt full. These were people who had fought for truth, who had refused to let evil triumph. As Elias and Hannah exchanged vows, Hope began to fuss in Red Hawk's arms. The old man bounced her gently, and she quieted, her eyes fixed on her mother with absolute trust. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and ate simple food under the open sky, Hannah found herself standing with Elias at the edge of the property, looking out over the land they now officially shared. I never thought I'd have this, she said quietly. A home, a family, peace. Elias put his arm around her shoulders, a gesture that had become natural between them. Neither did I. I thought I'd die alone on this piece of dirt, haunted by ghosts. And now I have a reason to live? He looked at her seriously. You and Hope saved me, Hannah. Just as much as I saved you. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Then we're even. Hope's laughter rang out as Red Hawk showed her a butterfly that had landed on his hand. The sound was pure and joyful, untouched by the darkness of her conception. She'll never know, Hannah said, watching her daughter. About Theodore, about how she came to be. We'll tell her she's ours, born of love, because that's what she is now. Elias nodded. That's exactly what she is. That night, after the guests had left and Hope was sleeping soundly in her cradle, Hannah and Elias sat on their porch as they had so many times before. But now, Hannah wore a wedding ring, and the ranch felt less like a hiding place and more like a home. Do you think we'll be happy? Hannah asked, her hand finding Elias's in the darkness. I think we already are, he replied. And in that moment, under a sky full of stars, with their daughter sleeping peacefully inside and Red Hawk's distant fire visible on the far ridge, they were. The past would always be part of them. The pain, the loss, the violence. But it no longer defined them. They had taken the broken pieces of their lives and built something new, something stronger. They had built a family, not through blood or obligation, but through choice and love and the simple, profound act of standing together when the world tried to tear them apart. And that, more than anything else, was worth fighting for. Sometimes the loneliest roads lead us to the people we were always meant to find. Elias and Hannah's story reminds us that family isn't always about blood or the names we're born with. It's about the people who stand beside us when the world turns dark, who see our worth when we can't see it ourselves, who choose to stay when leaving would be easier. They teach us that it's never too late to start over, that broken pieces can be rebuilt into something beautiful, and that the scars we carry don't have to define our future. Red Hawk showed us that protection comes in many forms, and that true strength lies in standing up for those who cannot stand alone. Hope grew up surrounded by love that was chosen, not obligated, and that made all the difference. We all face moments when we feel cast aside, when shame threatens to bury us, when the people who should protect us become the ones we need protecting from. But like Hannah discovered, speaking our truth has power. Like Elias learned, hiding from our past doesn't heal it. And like all of them proved together, standing up against injustice, even when we're afraid, can change everything. Have you ever had someone stand up for you when no one else would? Or have you been that person for someone else? Share your story in the comments below. Let's remind each other that we're not alone, that courage is contagious, and that choosing love over bitterness is the most powerful thing we can do. Your story matters. Please leave a comment.